In her novel, Ayn Rand envisions the world in an unspecified near future that is experiencing apocalyptic social and economic collapse, brought on essentially by the spread of modern liberal thinking. The world is being destroyed by bad ideas, the kind of bad ideas that Unitarian Universalists historically have done a lot to advance. And as people helplessly watch society crumble around them, they bitterly ask this sort of slang question that even they don't know what it means. Oh well, who is John Galt? John Galt's the hero of the novel, and the whole world is asking about him even though they don't know it, and the whole world is looking for him. They don't know if he's real or not even, but they know that he's the only man who can save us all from disaster. And the key to our salvation lies in embracing his philosophy, which coincidentally is also Ayn Rand's philosophy, called objectivism. The world can be saved by good ideas. For example, the ideas laid out in Atlas Shrugged. Now, Atlas Shrugged, if you haven't had the pleasure, is sui generis. It is like no other novel ever written on earth. First of all, it's massive. It's 1,100 pages of teeny tiny Old Testament print. David Foster Wallace picks up Atlas Shrugged and goes, man, this is a long book. James Michener goes, I don't know if I have the time for this book. It utterly defies genre. It's a science fiction mystery adventure story that pits brave free market industrialists and philosophers of reason against the forces of evil, who are represented by socialists, government bureaucrats, social workers, and modern artists. It is the pulpiest of pulp novels, with a dashing Latin outlaw, pirate raids, a hidden Paradise Valley, scheming villains, a sexy leading lady, and a government death ray. And it all ends with a desperate attempt to rescue the hero, who is being tortured by government agents in a secret underground lair. But, while all this is going on, the characters frequently pause in the action to deliver pages and pages of philosophical speeches. Speeches about the meaning of money, or the philosophy of sex, or the dangers of government regulation, or the psychology of modern art. And right before the big action finish, the reader is treated to a 90-page essay on philosophy, laying out Ayn Rand's ideas about pretty much everything in the world. Reason, consciousness, free will, morality, economics, politics, epistemology, everything. Ayn Rand would most emphatically agree with our responsive reading today. It matters what we believe. So, who is Ayn Rand, and what did she believe, and why do we care? Well, Ayn Rand was born Alyssa Rosenbaum in 1905 to an upper-middle-class Jewish family in St. Petersburg, Russia. Her father owned and ran a successful pharmacy, so they were atypically well off for people of that time. She lived to see the communist takeover and the subsequent Civil War, and during that time her family's property was confiscated, and they were often left in a state of near starvation. Now, that alone might have been enough to sour anyone on communism, but there's every evidence that even as a child, Rand was sort of ideologically and emotionally opposed to communism. The imagination of her youth had been fired by pulpy Western adventure stories that she had got from overseas, right? Breathless yarns of fearless explorers and brave heroes and dashing men of action. That to her is what life was all about. Adventure and excitement and joy. And her vision of what a human being should be was formed by those heroes. Human beings, she would have said men, are intended to be heroes. And she had no interest in people who did not view their own life in heroic terms. And so she despised the communist emphasis on the common man and the good of the common man. And she despised, above all, the idea that the individual mind should be subordinate to the will of the masses, that people should toe the party line, that people should repeat the latest communist propaganda for the good of the people. This was the environment that she was exposed to as a young woman. The two things that Ayn Rand was passionately in love with all of her life were the free and independent mind and the man of action who served no master but himself. And she viewed communism as the enemy of both. Happily for her, as a young woman in her 20s, Rand was able to obtain an exit visa to visit some relatives in Chicago. This was during a time of relative loosening of Soviet control, so she was able to escape. So she was off to America, the land of her dreams, and everyone knew that she was never coming back. And by this point in her life, she had already decided that it was her future to be a writer and to work in Hollywood. And she aggressively set out to do both of those things. In Russia, she'd seen a lot of Hollywood movies, which cemented her notion of America as a land of limitless freedom, of wealth, of joy, and of sexy adventures, which contrasted very favorably with the mindless conformity and endless drudgery which a life of communism offered. Communist Russia was not sexy. Now, as chance would have it, on her very first day visiting Hollywood, Rand missed the bus, and she got offered a ride home from Cecil B. DeMille, who was very amused by her sort of crazy, excited chatter and her strange Russian accent. So he gave her a job doing odds and ends on film sets. And that quickly turned into work editing and then writing screenplays. Soon she was also married to a handsome ex-actor. She was living her dream, the promise of freedom and adventure and achievement and romance that the image of America had always conjured up for her. She was in love with the idea of America. She was shocked, however, to learn that not everyone in America shared her enthusiasm for the American way of life as it was currently being experienced, because this was the Great Depression. And so some people had a few quibbles with capitalism and the way it was working out for everyone at that time. And this was also the red decade in Hollywood. So she was disappointed and angered to learn that there were American intellectuals and artists who criticized capitalism, criticized the American way of life, and worse, who held up communism as the ideal social order. Having experienced it, she felt very differently about that. And this began a lifelong hate affair with the American left. A very intense hate affair. So Rand was determined that she would use her literature to defend her vision of freedom and individualism. And although these themes appear in all of her works, they reach their full fruition in her final novel, her masterpiece, such as it is, Atlas Shrugged, in which she would lay out her liberating philosophy of objectivism for all time. My philosophy, she wrote, in essence, is the concept of man as a heroic being, with his own happiness as the moral purpose of his life, with productive achievement as his noblest activity, and reason as his only absolute. That doesn't sound so bad to me. And in fact, the ideas of Ayn Rand share some overlap with some ideas that are prominent in the history of Unitarian Universalism. First of all, she was a humanist. She did not believe in God or the supernatural. She rejected entirely the concept of heaven or hell. She did not believe in sin. She believed that it was up to us human beings to create heaven or hell on earth through the work of our own minds and our own hands. Sounds familiar? She believed in the independent mind above all. That people must live by reason, think for themselves, follow no master, and build their own vision of the good life on earth according to the lights of their own conscience. That also sounds familiar. She despised prejudice, conformity, convention, superstition, any timidity of vision. She idolized the creative genius, be they artist, scientist, inventor, or business person. She would have loved Steve Jobs. She believed that the earth is a realm of goodness, that joy and fulfillment is the birthright of every human being if they will only allow themselves to experience it, if they will claim it for themselves. She believed that optimism was the proper mindset for people to have. She believed that if people lived virtuous and rational lives, it was right and proper and to be expected that they would be rewarded with happiness and success. In this respect, she could be channeling Unitarian minister William Ellery Channing. Although she would never have used these words, she was talking about the Unitarian idea of salvation by character. Only it wasn't a heavenly salvation, but earthly joy that she was after. And joy is the underlying theme of everything that she talks about. If you want to understand why young people sometimes are really struck with Ayn Rand, one of the reasons goes back to that first reading, where the woman is taking a moment of relaxation from the sort of productive work that she's been doing, and she's listening to this music, and it's the essence of joy. And because of her own virtue and her own purposeful life, she's able to experience this sort of transcendent, religious, Rand wouldn't call it that, religious experience of joy and peace on earth. And that vision is something that's very appealing to people. Just that joy is your birthright. That is what you should be experiencing all the time. So, where we differ a little bit, where Unitarian Universalism stresses an ethic of interdependence through our principles like justice, equity, compassion, and human relations, our seventh principle, the interdependence of all living things, Ayn Rand taught an ethic of complete independence. She believed that every man was a self-made man, I'm using her language, and that the only ethical duty of every person was to live for their own happiness, period, the end. Ultimately, the highest good I should seek in life is my own good, to the best of my own ability. And what society owes me is only to get out of my way and let me try. So in practice, she interpreted that to mean that the perfect society was a society of totally unregulated free market capitalism. A society in which each person, allegedly, succeeds or fails based on their own mind and their own ability and their own virtuous actions. A society where creative geniuses have the maximum opportunity to flourish, and in the process they shower the world with the products of their brilliant minds, iPhones and polio vaccines and laser surgery and space travel and passenger side airbags and microwave dinners and prosthetic limbs and Google Translate and all the things that us regular people would never be able to create with our own more modest capabilities. We are the beneficiaries of their genius. Of course, they don't care about that because they are only living for themselves. But since they get piles and piles of money, it works out pretty okay for them too. Does any of this sound familiar? So as we learned in the second reading, something has gone terribly wrong in Ayn Rand's America. She looks around herself and she does not see the joyously confident, healthy, happy, purposeful creators that she thinks we should all be. She viewed modern people as timid, as afraid, as purposeless, as dispirited. And the reason she believed, her analysis of the sort of malaise of the modern world, was that people had been hoodwinked by liberals into believing that they should apologize for their success, and hoodwinked into believing that they should sacrifice for the good of other people. And she believed that that was a fundamental mistake. And she wanted to liberate people from that mistake by teaching them that they should never apologize for who they are or what they have. Now, for people who don't have anything, that message is maybe a little lukewarm in its relevance. But for people who have a lot, or expect to have a lot, or dream of someday having a lot, you can see where it might have a certain appeal. And so in the story of Atlas Shrugged, which expresses her vision, the job creators, the wealth creators, the one-percenters, they decide that they're going to go on strike rather than to continue to cooperate with an oppressive, liberal social order that wants to regulate them and tax them. They quit their businesses and leave. They take their marbles and they go home. And American society, presumably now left in the hands of the 47% of Americans who will never be convinced to take responsibility for their own lives, per ex-presidential candidate Mitt Romney, American society swiftly collapses. And then at the end of the novel, the heroes return to rebuild a brave new capitalist world order on the rubble of the old one. So the moral of the story is contained in the title of the novel. The 1%ers are like the mythical giant Atlas, holding up the world on his shoulders, on their shoulders. We lesser beings trust that they will always be willing to bear that burden, however much we harass them with regulations, taxes, snotty cartoons in the New Yorker. But Rand says if they should ever decide to shrug, to lay down their heavy responsibility, then the whole world will come crashing down around us. And she would add, it serves us right. So, it's a little astonishing to me that this book was never published, just because if you haven't read it, you can't even get how crazy this book is. And again, 1,100 pages, New Testament print. It was not well received. The New York Times called it a Nietzschean nightmare. Harold Bloom curls his lip just thinking about it. But it was and is a smash success. A smash success. It is frequently cited as being the second most influential book after the Bible. 55 years after its original publication, 30 years after Rand's death, it continues to sell like crazy. In fact, it's more popular than ever, possibly because of the crisis, the economic crisis that sort of parallels some of the events in her books. It sold 500,000 copies in 2009. It sold almost as many copies in 2011, and it continues to sell by the hundreds of thousands of copies every year. And its influence has spread far out into American political life. And there's Congressman Rand Paul, who is named after her. Alan Greenspan was a close and personal associate of Ayn Rand, and it was her ideas about not regulating markets that led him to not regulate markets, which may have been a questionable call. The billionaire Koch brothers, who, if you've heard of them, they funnel crazy amounts of money into right-wing causes, are heavily influenced by Ayn Rand. The Cato Institute, a free market think tank in Washington, which is very, very influential in shaping Republican politics, is currently headed by a man who was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar bank, BB&T. He is a major contributor to the Ayn Rand Institute. And he used to give copies of Atlas Shrugged to all of his senior executives and make them read it. Today, the BB&T Charitable Trust is giving millions of dollars to colleges and universities to start programs dedicated to the study of Ayn Rand. If you will start a course on Ayn Rand and teach it, we will give you crazy amounts of money. Some colleges say yes, and some say no. The Ayn Rand Institute itself has a similar program where they tell high school teachers, if you will teach this book, we will give it to you for free. And they send out hundreds of thousands of copies every year to students in high school. And her ideas have a definite impact on policy. You can hear them in the culture and in the things that come out. If you remember the sort of bizarro world moment from the 2012 campaign where some Republicans were talking about not just lowering taxes on rich people, but raising taxes on poor people to make things more fair, because those poor people have been getting a break for too long at the expense of rich people. They were channeling pure Ayn Rand. They were channeling this Atlas Shrugged worldview. And from sort of the upper echelons of American political life, she has filtered down to the grassroots. She is wildly popular in the Tea Party movement. According to a Christian Science Monitor story, at Tea Party meetings in September 2010, Rand's name competed in popularity with Jefferson. Some demonstrations even started with a reading from Atlas Shrugged. which was coupled with the declaration that this book should be treated as America's second Declaration of Independence. It is an irony of ironies that the Tea Party movement has embraced as its get back to American values hero a Russian-born atheist who taught that the central ideas of Christianity were not just wrong, but evil. And I haven't even mentioned heroic marriage. But such is the American political scene today. The success of Atlas Shrugged is a testament to the power of ideas to excite and inspire. Ayn Rand held up a unique moral vision, setting aside the capitalist stuff. She held up a unique moral vision that tells people at the root, any person can lead a life of purpose and happiness and moral value just by taking ideas seriously and living according to the courage of their convictions. She tells people, especially young people, you can be a hero. We can all be heroes by living out our own vision with courage and conviction and passion. She tells people it matters what you believe. As a Unitarian Universalist, I could not agree more. I just think that she had some crucially wrong beliefs. And as those beliefs have a lot of institutional muscle and a lot of institutional money behind them right now, pushing them out into the culture, I think it is critically important that we get our own ideas out there. If we disagree with hers, we need to make that known. If we have an alternative, we need to be speaking it. Given what we know about institutional poverty, about the legacy of slavery and racism, which Rand totally ignores, given the recent spectacular failure of unregulated markets, given the looming specter of global warming and the environmental devastation that currently threatens us all, I would submit that her every man for himself ethic is totally wrong, is 100% the wrong idea for our times and for the problems that we are facing today. I would suggest that her idea of the self-made man is a fantasy, that such a thing never has existed and never will exist in the sense that she presents it. And her understanding of capitalism is not so hot either. I believe it is actually our Unitarian Universalist principles, particularly our emphasis on the importance of interdependence, which form the relevant vision of the good for the 21st century. And we need to be speaking about those principles, and we need to be speaking that vision of interdependence. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "We are caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny." That is our vision that we counterpose to Ayn Rand. The vision that says we are all in this together now. To survive the coming challenges that we're going to face, we will need courage, we will need our reason, we will need brilliant, innovative thinkers, and we will need heroes. But above all, and contrary to Ayn Rand, we will need each other. May it be so. Would you please rise in body or spirit for our closing hymn, number 1?